Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to all our viewers. This is our educational channel Learning Biology Online, and we have already started a new lecture on cell. So previously we discussed the discovery of cell and how different scientists in different eras they contributed in its discovery. And in this lecture we will start off with the different contents of the cells that are present within the structure, and then we will go through the details of two very important structures that surround the cell of animal and plant cell respectively, that are the cell membrane and the cell wall. So by the end of this lecture, we hope you will be having a very good idea of the different contents that are present within a cell, and you will also be able to understand what is the significance of the different components of plasma and cell membrane as well. So coming to the cellular components, we already have an idea, the plasma membrane and the cell membrane, that are the respective outermost layers of the animal and plant cell. And within the cellular component, we have the cytoplasm that consists of other relevant organelles of the cell. And we have a centrally placed nucleus in case of animal cells, whereas in plant cells it is pushed to one side due to presence of a large vacuole. And this nucleus is very significant in both plant and animal cells, as it consists of all the genetic material, that are chromosomes, and DNA, that consists of all the genetic coding of the relevant information of different functions that are performed by each cell. Then coming to the plasma membrane, that is the outermost covering in case of the animal cells. It forms the outermost boundary, and coming to its composition, it is chemically composed of most amount of protein, that is 60 to 80%, followed by 20 to 40% of lipids and a small component of carbohydrates. So these are the three different compositions or the components of the plasma membrane that are due to which plasma membrane it's actively performing its functions. So the two different models that have been presented to discuss and have a very good idea of the plasma membrane. The first model, known as the unit membrane model, it was presented somewhere in the 1930s, and according to this, the protein layer surrounds the lipid bilayer, and this is how the cell membrane that was identified and its composition was proposed first of all. So you can see over here the two scientists who gave the idea of this model. According to them, protein hydrophilic layer was the outermost covering, and it covers the two lipid bilayers. So you can see over here how the lipid bilayer and the protein layer, it is surrounding the lipid bilayer within. So you can see the hydrophobic and also the hydrophilic component. So this model was presented by two scientists, Davison and Daniel, in the 1930s. The second model to discuss the plasma membrane and its composition was the fluid mosaic model, presented in the 1970s by Singer and Nicholson. They presented a much better or modified version of this plasma membrane that gives a relatively better understanding of how these different chemicals they are involved in formation of the plasma membrane. So there is a lipid bilayer that is the major component of this cell membrane, followed by some proteins that are embedded within the structures. Okay, so there are charged pores that allow the movement of different sorts of ions through active and passive membrane. So this was the model that described how the plasma membrane, it acts as a semi-permeable membrane with only allowing a few particles to pass through it. सेकेंडली ये जो एक्टिव और पैसिव ट्रांसपोर्ट है, हम इसको लेटर ऑन इन आवर लेक्चर डिस्कस करेंगे, दैट हाउ active and passive transport they are different from each other, where basically the active transport, it requires energy for the movement of the ions or any sort of material, whereas passive transport does not require any energy, ये because of difference in concentration gradient, ये movement जो है वो occur करती है from higher to lower concentration, whereas active transport, it requires ATP molecules for the movement of energy, for the movement of different ions. So basically energy is required for this movement. So you can see the structure over here, the lipid bilayer. इसमें अब हम describe करेंगे जो different components हमें नज़र आते हैं cell membrane में. तो ये जो हमने head और tail वाला portion यहाँ पे draw किया है, this is the lipid bilayer present on both sides. ठीक है, so this shallow demarcation, this shows the lipid bilayer, जिसमें ये lipid का head portion है, that is hydrophilic in nature, and the tail portion, this is hydrophobic in nature. And then you can see the different proteins that are embedded on the surface, followed by the different carbohydrates shown as glycoproteins. Then coming to the functional component, any outer layer that is either cell membrane or the cell wall, it acts primarily as protection of the cell, and it also is involved in providing rigidity or you can say integrity to maintain the cell shape. And then it has a role in transport of material, but in case of plasma membrane, we need to remember that it only allows few selective ions to pass through it. Then the different processes that are involved in the movement of different ions, they are mentioned over here. Specifically, endocytosis is the mechanism through which the cell membrane, it will engulf or invaginate different sorts of materials. And then the intake of solid material is mentioned as phagocytosis, whereas pinocytosis is the process in which liquid or aqueous material passes through this membrane. Then we come to the cell wall that we have discussed is the outermost layer in case of plant cell, which is composed of further three different layers: primary, secondary, and the middle lamella. So you can see the composition of cell wall over here, the cellulose, and there are deposition of pectin and hemicellulose. So in comparison to secondary wall, the primary wall is less rigid, the secondary wall is more involved in providing rigidity or structural integrity to the cell wall. You can see the different ions, silica, waxes, and other chemical components that are involved in formation of this secondary wall. Talking about the middle lamella, this is the layer that acts as a cementing layer between the primary and the secondary wall, and this layer is basically formed by the primary lamella, that is during the developmental stages. So obviously cell wall as an outermost layer of plant cell, it provides a definite shape and keeps it rigid. So this rigid function basically comes from the secondary wall, and you can see over here that cell wall does not allows any acts as a barrier. Whereas you can see in case of plasma membrane कि certain chemicals या ions के लिए that is a barrier where it does not allows some particles to pass through it. But in case of cell wall, it does not act as a barrier and material can easily pass through it. So we will continue to discuss some of the other important organelles present within the cells, how they function, what is their basic composition. So this is the end of our video. Do like our video and share it with your colleagues, and in the comment section do mention if you have any question relevant to the components that we have discussed in this lecture, and do subscribe to our channel and click the bell button so you can receive the latest notification of our upcoming lectures on regular basis. Thank you very much.